So I have 40 hours of material. And when I talked to Ben, he said I have 18 minutes. And so I'm going to give you something that you can actually leave here with. And basically what I'm going to teach you is how to be more effective with your communication, but also how to influence. Because people are your biggest resource. Because whatever you want, somebody else already has. You just have to get it from them. Whether it be more ticket sales or more money or more people in your door, somebody already knows how to do that and they can help you with that. And so to raise your level of influence is going to be an important part of anything that you do, whether it be if you're a parent or a teacher or a business owner. So I'm going to pick some people out. It's just like the show last night. You don't get a choice. You have to participate, but I won't call you up here. So what's your name? Shannon. Shannon, if you had to describe in one word, which I know there's more, but in one word, one of the emotions that you're feeling right now, what word would you put with one of those? And anxiety. You're not going to have to come up, I promise you. All right, anxiety. That's a good one. You could have picked anything. Now, who's the gentleman sitting next to you? Do you know him? Dan, do you know him?
I just met him.
Just met him. What if Dan and I had something that we planned, and at a certain time that he was going to reach over and just slap you as hard as he can in the back of the head? So if he did that, what emotion in one word would you feel if that happened?
Anger.
Anger. All right. Two emotions. You guys have heard the term altered state, and I'm not talking about the altered state that some of you have heard back from the 60s. I'm talking about just a normal altered state. My definition, and when I say state, I mean emotional state. My definition of an altered state is any emotional state that you're not in right now. So anger would be an altered state for Shannon because you're not in that right now. But then if he slapped you in the back of the head, you will go to anger, which would no longer be an altered state. Maybe calm would be an altered state for you, or any other emotion that you weren't feeling at that moment. So that it changes all the time. The average person changes emotional states approximately 4 times an hour. So I say average person approximately 4 times an hour, because you may change 8 in 1 hour, and you may get home and you may not change at all because you're just vegging on the couch. So that could happen. But on average, over a 24-hour period, about 4 times an hour. There is a process that you go through in your brain. And Michelle, you can probably wire people up and watch this. But some parts of your brain get active and some of them die down depending on the emotional state that you're in. And you each have your own fingerprint. So Shannon, you have your own fingerprint in your mind for anxiety. Somebody else can feel anxiety, but it looks different if you hook them up. Everybody has their own fingerprint. We did some studies with the Ohio State University where we actually showed people comedians for about 5 minutes, and then we switched them over to a horror movie like Friday the 13th, and then we would shock them because we had a little shocker in the chair that we could push a button. That was fun. And so we would just see how they changed emotional states. So the emotional state change, that process that you go through, it could be instant. For example, if he slapped you in the back of the head, you would almost instantly go to anger. Or if somebody cut you off on the highway, you get anger or scared or whatever it might be for you. It could be a slow process. If you have a bad day at the office and you go home and it takes you an hour to unwind before you actually calm yourself down, it could be a slow process to change that emotional state. It doesn't matter. You still have a process that you go through. This process here that you go through to change from one emotional state to another is hypnosis. That's all it is. I've been a hypnotist since 1989, and I train people in it now. And everybody thinks that they know what hypnosis is from the movies and TV, and it's not. The hypnosis is basically the process that you go through when you change from one emotional state to another. So when I said, who in here has ever been hypnotized before on purpose, the on purpose was attached to that for a reason, because all of you have been hypnotized, because every time you change an emotional state, you go through that process. Also, as you speak to somebody, your job is to change somebody's emotional state. If you tell them about a vacation you went on, or if you have to have a talk with one of your employees, you change their emotional state, so you are actually hypnotizing other people all the time also. So I deem you all hypnotists. So go out and start practicing. That's what most of them do. So you've all had the experience before. Here's the thing, though. With your mind, you become suggestible for moments as you go through that switch. So somewhere in this process, you become highly suggestible. So what do I mean by suggestible? Well, I mean that you tend to take in instructions without really questioning where they're coming from. You can find these times when you go and you drive down the road and you can't remember how you got the last few miles, and you pass an exit and you kind of just zone out. Maybe it's one of those times that you reach out to pull on a door, and it's a door that actually pushes, but it has a handle that looks like it pulls, and you stand there with your arm out. The amount of time that you stand there with your arm out, this is when you're in the suggestible state, and I'll explain why in a minute here. And you can use that, and if nothing else, if you don't learn anything else from me today, remember that when people zone out, it's almost like that time you reach out when you were in school and to shake somebody's hand, then you pull your hand back and say, psych. Same thing, because they stand there with their hand out. I came from Columbus, Ohio, originally. And I was out with a group of my friends, and we were going to a movie. And ahead of us was about 4 or 5 guys that were going to see a movie also when we were walking in. The group walked up, and the first guy pulled on the door, but it was one of those doors, again, that pushed. So he stood there with his hand out for like 2 seconds, and that's when I knew that he was in this loop trying to figure out what to do. So I said, it'll open if you just drop to your knees. And he fell to the ground. Fun thing to do. It's a really fun thing to do. All you have to do is catch people in that state because they're highly suggestible. Your brain goes into a loop, and then you're trying to determine what the next step is. And so you usually get it yourself by going over scenarios in your mind. But if somebody is there with you, there's a very good chance that you will follow whatever suggestion comes in first, and this guy did. So it's always a fun thing to play with. So you could do that too. So if you're driving down the road with your husbands, ladies, and he zones out, you can just start saying diamond ring for Christmas, diamond ring for Christmas. Just keep repeating that until he comes back. So that is all hypnosis is. And that's what I want you to do when you're sitting in front of a client or in front of an employer, anybody that you need to influence. I'm going to give you one more term, and then I'm going to tell you how to utilize this, something called a transderivational search. It is a term in psychology, and you don't have to know that. Do not write that down. Psychiatrists even shorten that down to TDS. What a transderivational search is, it's the way that your brain brings back memories. The limit, if I was talking to you back in the 90s, of your awareness, the things that you can be aware of at any one time, was 7 plus or minus 2. That is not true anymore. People's capacity to be aware of things has gone down over the years, and it's only about 5 plus or minus 2 now, so which means anywhere from 3 to 7 things you can think of at any one time. So if you think of your conscious mind as the tabletop that you're sitting at, and you can have approximately 5 different files on that tabletop at any one time. Your unconscious mind, which the difference between the conscious mind and unconscious mind is your conscious mind is really, you can't find it, by the way, if you dissect it. It's just a metaphor that people in psychology attach to it so they can explain the processes. But your conscious mind is anything you're aware of right now for the purposes of what we're talking about here. Your unconscious mind is anything that you're not aware of right now. For example, if I say think of a black cat. Most of you, maybe all of you, we're not thinking of a black cat, but now you are. So you had to pull that memory out of someplace. So pretend that you have 5 files on your tabletop, and all of your other memories are underneath the table. So when I said black cat, you had to reach under the table, metaphorically, and pull up a file of the black cat so you understood what it was, and it's up here on top of the table. At the same time, you also had to get rid of something from the table in order to make room for it. This is why you can be speaking with someone, and at some point during the conversation, a third person comes up and they ask you a question, and you answer it, and then you turn back to the person you were speaking to, and you have no idea what you were talking about, and you ask them, you know, what were we talking about? Because you put that thing under the table. So let's pretend that when you were born, somebody in your family, your parents, or whoever it was, until you could take this over, every experience that you had in your life, they wrote down on an index card and threw it down or threw it into a closet, right? And then when you got old enough, you did the same thing. Every experience you had, you wrote down, threw it into a closet. So if I said, what's your name right here? Yep. Susie. So if I said, Susie, what'd you do on your 5th birthday? Do you know? No. Some of you might, but most of us don't. But if you were writing down all of your experiences on an index card, and I said, what'd you do on your 5th birthday? You could go into that room where we threw all those papers and spend probably years going through all of those, but then eventually come back out and tell us exactly everything that happened on your 5th birthday. You could do that, theoretically. People with photographic memories, they do this quicker. They can really do that. And it's not because they remember things better. Their brain is just designed to file things better. So they know how to get back to it. Instead of throwing it in the room, they put it into a filing cabinet and they can just go through it. That is kind of what a transderivational search is. So when I said black cat, you went into that room and you quickly pulled out all the files that meant black cat to you, and then you brought them back, and now you know what a black cat is. You realize that if I say think of a purple elephant with pink polka dots, you have to go in that room and construct everything and then pull it back out. But it happens so fast that you're not aware of it. It's just something that happens. That's what happens when you go from one emotional state to another. Your brain goes into that room, goes through all the files to try to add meaning to what is going on, and then it comes back, and then you go into anger. And it would be quick for you if somebody slapped you in the back of the head. And then you know what to do at that point. You can react to it however you would normally or typically react. So the more that you can keep people in that process of diving down in their unconscious mind, or that transderivational search, going into that room and pulling these files out and really having to think, the more suggestible they become during that conversation. Because they're always going back and forth. That process is what creates the suggestibility. So how do you do that? I mean, you could wait until they're at a door pulling on it instead of pushing, but that's not feasible for most of the things that you're going to be talking to people as. It's actually the questions that you ask. For example, if you know what you teach your employees, or if you're an employee, Lance, what do you do?
We're writers.
You're a writer. So you do interviews?
Yes.
Yes, good. So what's a question you would typically ask anybody that you would interview?
At the end of the interview, you say, is there anything else I should know?
Anything else I should know at the end of the interview? Yeah. That's good. And people usually answer yes or no. If they answer yes, they probably fill in the gaps. If not, they answer no, right? That is nothing that they really have to think about for the most part, because they know if there's anything else that they need to go over. However, in an interview, you have, or on a date, it doesn't matter, on a date, on an interview, if you're with your family, with your employees, if you ask questions, for example, on a date, my specialty when I was doing therapy was relationships and dating. And so I would teach guys actually how to speak, because most of us don't know how to speak. And you would go out, and you guys have all done this, I bet, while you were here, not just guys, but women too, but you ask people, what do you do? Is that right? Has anybody not asked anybody else that? You ask what do you do? And then, and just like I did Lance, and Lance, you said, I'm a writer, right? Easy response for you. You didn't have to spend that time going into your closet and pulling out. But if I say, Lance, a lot of people will ask you what you do, which that's kind of what I want to know at some point. But let me ask you this. What is the most challenging thing that you have to do when you work? Not because it's the most difficult thing, but because maybe you don't like to do it, or you really have to just buckle down and think about it to get it done. What would you say?
Getting clients to pay.
Getting clients to pay. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sometimes it's a long process of being drawn out, and we don't have the money or whatever. It just takes a long time.
And how have you tried to solve it before?
How have I tried to solve it?
Uh-huh.
Usually I say, okay, it's a different solution for everybody, I guess. Just give more time or whatever.
So all I'm doing is asking Lance questions to keep the conversation going, but they're questions that are not the typical questions that you have to actually think about those. And he's coming up with the answers pretty quickly, but some people you'll see they roll their eyes, roll in the back of their head, and they're thinking about it when you ask them certain questions. Those are the kind of questions that you want to ask people because it keeps them in that process. And there is a point. I have a book, and it's an ebook. You can download it off my website. And in the book, there's a point that you can notice when people glaze over. These are the times that you're in a college lecture, or maybe even a lecture at some conference, and you're listening to the speaker, and you just kind of glaze over. You just kind of zone out because you're either lost or confused, or you just, you're in that zone. You just glaze out. So there's a point when I was talking to Lance that he would have glazed out. He would have just went into, and we call it a hypnotic mask is what we call it. And in the book, I give an instruction because it's more of like a workbook, but you go through the book, and I give you a hypnosis audio recording to listen to, and then I want you to do it with somebody else because I want you to begin to recognize what that hypnotic mask looks like. It's just kind of a relaxed sort of look on the person's face, and they stare at you, and they answer the questions because they're becoming more and more suggestible. And when you learn to recognize that in people, that is the point where you can start to give direct suggestions to people. And it's not hard to recognize. It just takes a couple times of you seeing it. And you've all seen it before, but you've not known that you were looking at it. So, I would recommend, if you don't use my stuff, use somebody's stuff and go through, get a hypnosis. You can download it for free off of iTunes, I'm sure, or YouTube, and get a hypnosis, experience it, hypnosis audio program, experience it, and then watch somebody else go through it. And you'll see the look on their face that they go through. However, I tell you that, and sometimes if you're out on a date or in a business meeting and somebody glazes over, you may be boring. And it may not be anything with them, so you could have lost them also. So the key thing that I want you to walk away with is I want you to ask better questions of people. I want you to get into a conversation, and I want you to really care about other people and what they say, because the better the question, the longer that you're going to keep them in this process of going into that transderivational search and changing emotional states, and the more suggestible that person is going to become. It's all about questions. You don't have to be a hypnotist. You don't have to know anything else other than that. Just ask better questions that make them think. You guys have that? You also, like Stephen Covey said, one of his 7 habits of highly effective people was to start with the end in mind. Every interaction that you go in, you should have the end in mind. What do you want that person to do or feel? Because everything is based on emotion. So when you leave that conversation, it could be a want and buying emotion that you want them to feel, so they buy from you. Or you may want them, depending on the situation, you may want them just to be happy when you leave the situation or the conversation. And you want to know, because then you can start to notice how you can steer the conversation to get the emotions that you want. Because if you're selling somebody, you want to want and buying. You want to find out if they've bought anything before and had a really good experience with it. You want to find out if they've bought anything and were so happy because people told them it was a good decision. And if you can take them through that process, they begin to build all of these feelings up. And then you link your product or service to it. Or if it's a conversation where you're talking to your kids about anything that you don't want them to do or want them to do, and you begin to link good feelings to the things you want them to do and the bad feelings to the things you don't want them to do, it's all about emotion. So keep that in mind. Ask better questions, and you can all be hypnotists. 30 seconds early, Ben. Where are you? Are you really done?